everyone to American Family Insurance DreamBank, where we believe in the transformative power of dreams. I'm Madeline, and I'm really excited to have you with us today. Here at American Family Insurance, we believe communities are stronger and the future is brighter when people are actively pursuing their dreams. That's why we created DreamBank, an inspirational community destination and digital experience dedicated to dreamers everywhere. From our daily event series to immersive signature programs, there's something for every dreamer. Our always free offerings are designed to help you celebrate the dream journey, overcome obstacles, and stay motivated. Now, I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker. Dr. Adam J. Bock teaches at the Wisconsin School of Business. I will pass it off to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maddie. I'm really excited to be here. And I want to encourage you, since you're here, open up the chat box because there might come a point during this that you'd like to put a question in right away. I'm hoping we're going to get through this quickly and there'll be some time for Q&A towards the end as well. So we're here to talk a little bit about AI, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself in just a moment. But even before we do any of that, what I'd really like to do is actually to start with a poll. So here is the poll that we're going to do, and Maddie's going to put that up for you. Please participate in this poll. It is anonymous. We are not tracking you in any way, shape, or form. We are just trying to get a sense of where you are with this. So how much are you using AI or Gen AI? Maybe pretty much for everything, or daily as needed, weekly when you think of it, maybe monthly, maybe you just got started, maybe you just haven't tried it at all. Or maybe your perspective is, look, I am never going to use Gen AI. So again, this is totally anonymous. We just want to get a sense of what you're thinking, and we'll share the results with you so you can see what the rest of the group is thinking as well. So take a quick moment, share what your response to this poll is, and then in just a moment or so, Maddie's going to share those responses back so you can see what everybody else is thinking about for this one as well. So how much are you using AI and Gen AI? How are we doing, Maddie? We getting close? Awesome. So I think that if I'm not sure if you see the results, I can see the results. So it looks like about 2/3 of you are using it daily when something comes up. Few of you weekly, some of you kind of monthly, you're just thinking about it. And we do have a couple people who are like, I'm just never going to use Gen AI. And you know what? That's totally fine. And we want to talk a little bit about how we want to think about AI going forward. So, okay, so who am I? Why am I talking to you here? So I'm at the Wisconsin School of Business. I also do work for the University of Minnesota, helping spin companies out of the University of Minnesota in a variety of spaces. I've spent 30 years consulting on strategy and innovation across a whole variety of organizations, everything from global multinational companies and microelectronics to dairy farmers in Wisconsin. I've been in venture finance, helping get money for startup companies, and I am the co-founder of 6 Technology Ventures, mostly in the life sciences, but actually last year, in a fairly amusing circumstance, I got involved in starting a Gen AI company. So it's important to understand a couple of things. I'm not a coder, right? And I'm not here to talk about code. I am very much a business person, but I've been involved in technology and new innovations and new ventures for a very, very long time. And I've had my own sort of experience with AI and Gen AI that has gotten me to here in the last couple of years. And I thought I'd share a little bit of those thoughts with you. So here's what we're going to try to do. Try to give you a little clarity on AI and Gen AI. Try to maybe put a little bit of it in context. I think that might be helpful for some of you who are still sort of wondering, well, what on earth is this and what do I do with it anyway? And maybe a little nervous about it. I'm going to show you a couple of use cases just in case you haven't tried these kinds of things before, hoping to kind of expand your thinking about how AI could potentially be used for your job, for your business ideas, or for your dreams going forward, and then try to talk a little bit about where this might be going into the future. And again, as I said, I'm hoping we'll have a few minutes for discussion or Q&A right at the end. You're welcome to, if you have a question that comes up while I'm talking, just throw it into chat. Maddie will read that out to me at the end, or you can just hold it till we get there. Okay, so let's do another poll really quickly here. So Maddie's going to put up poll number 2, and I want to just get your opinion. What is Gen AI anyway, really? Right? I mean, we see it all the time. People are talking about it. You may have probably played around with a couple of Gen AI engines, but I want to get an idea of what you think it is. So is it a sophisticated, complex software that replicates human cognition, right? Is it a neural network that's been trained on an incredibly large data set to generate media content? Is it a combination of software and hardware that can behave like a human being? Or is it just magic, right? I mean, maybe this is, we really need to go back to Harry Potter for this one, right? So just take a moment, again, totally anonymous, just want to see where your mind is with this. We are not tracking this in any way, shape, or form. Once we get most of your responses in, we'll just share this back, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I think about Gen AI. So again, is it sophisticated, complex software? Is it a neural network to generate media content? Is it a combination of software and hardware, or is it magic? So just take a quick moment here and enter in what your best response is. All right, so here are the results from this particular group. We have about a quarter of you feel I would like to describe it as sophisticated software that replicates human cognition. We got just under half recognizing that it's a neural network. So many of you may be familiar with the whole concept of a large language model, which is a neural network. Maybe it's a combination of software and hardware. We have one brave person willing to go out on a limb and admit that it's probably just magic. All right, so let's talk about this for a second here. It's not magic. Sorry, I know. It would be fun if it really were, but it's not. AI, broadly speaking, is any computational system that can solve complex problems. So yes, it involves both hardware and software. In the case of large language models, we are specifically talking about a neural network, right? And what's happening there is that the neural network is trained on a huge data set. And then when you enter in a prompt, that prompt is coded and put into that neural network to look for a pattern match. And basically, this enormous neural network, hundreds of billions of nodes, is generating a response based on what the likely matches are. There can be some surprising and even disconcerting results out of this. Now, there's unbelievably complex mathematics happening under the hood here, right? I mean, we're talking about a neural network in the case of the big models like ChatGPT or Gemini. We are talking about neural networks that represent hundreds of billions of points of data, right? And that's been trained on absolutely huge data sets of literature and information on the web and all this kind of stuff. And so recognizing how those things come together such that a prompt generates a response is actually not very obvious. So I recommend thinking about AI a little bit differently. It's any digital system or platform that performs sophisticated tasks that we would otherwise normally attribute to human thinking or cognition, right? And so when we talk about AI or Gen AI, what we're talking about are systems that appear to do things like learn or reason or problem solve. They have a mechanism of perception. They can take in information, whether it's a prompt from, like a chatbot, or it could be perception through something like a camera, right? They're capable of what appears to be language understanding and processing, but you have to be careful about that because we have to remember that there's a pattern matching process, right? And we'll talk about what this really means in a moment. And in some cases, there appears to be creativity, but this is very controversial, right? And there are some people who argue that these systems are creative, and there are people who argue that they are not. So it's good to recognize there are some examples of this, right? So for example, my car, which is newish, has an auto steer function, right? Well, I mean, I'm capable of doing that. It requires me looking and making decisions and then acting, but the car can do that for me now. Or similarly, chatbots, where you could have a conversation, maybe even get a little bit of life advice, or as we're beginning to hear about in the media now, something like therapy, right? So these are things that we would normally attribute to human thinking and cognition, but now this system appears to be able to do them as well. So if that's the case, maybe it's helpful to put this in a little bit of context, like how far back does AI really go, right? Clearly, ChatGPT was launched in 2022, but I think we all recognize that AI goes back further than that. So let's do another poll real quick here. Maddie will put this up. And I just want to know, how far do you think AI goes back? Is it 2014? Is it 2008? Maybe it's 2001? What about 1992 or all the way back to 1984? How far back does AI really go? Again, totally anonymous. Nobody's tracking. Nobody actually cares. It's just an opportunity for you to put in your idea, and we'll share what the group is thinking as a whole, and we'll talk a little bit about what the implications of that are. So awesome. I can see the responses are coming in, getting some good response rates in there. And in just a moment, Maddie will share their results. So, okay, so we have a nice even distribution, maybe 2014, 2008, 2001, and then a bigger chunk willing to go out on a limb and say maybe 1992 or even all the way back to 1984. Awesome. All right. So, okay, here's the thing though. Let's talk about this. You remember Adam's auto steer function, the fact that my car can steer for me? I got news for you. I bet you that technology goes back further than you think. Check this out. This is the X-29 NASA US Air Force airplane. Those cool forward swept wings were intended to be able to make this thing dramatically more maneuverable, but in fact, it's so maneuverable that it's unstable and a human pilot cannot fly it by his or herself. The only way for this plane to be flown is with a set of 6 computers that are making 40 decisions a second in order to steer this plane. And my friends, this plane was first flown in 1984. Okay, so this AI stuff goes further back than probably a lot of people even realized, right? This is a 41-year-old plane with auto steer. And check this out. If you think that's as far back as AI goes, you might wonder when the first chatbot was created. Well, it wasn't in 2022 with GPT, and it wasn't in 1992 or 1984. It was in 1966. Yes, that's even older than I am. I know, and you're thinking, wow, Adam, you're pretty old. So this was a chatbot developed at MIT in their artificial intelligence laboratory, which existed as far back as 1966. The intention was actually to show the limitations of AI. And the funny thing was that when Professor Weizenbaum asked people to use ELIZA, they loved it and they talked to it for a long time. And you can actually still talk to ELIZA online. I don't know if this deck's going to be made available afterwards, but you can just Google ELIZA chatbot and you will find a link to a working version of ELIZA if you would like to talk to the world's first chatbot, which was developed all the way back in 1966. Okay, so now that we know that AI has been around for a lot longer than we originally thought, maybe we need to ask this question, well, why are we so wound up about it now? And the reason is because the scale of these models has gotten so big and the cost of processing has gotten so low that now these kinds of technologies can be made available on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute basis. They've been out there for a long time. It just wasn't cost efficient to make them available. But now they're here, and there are all these demonstrated and relevant use cases in our business and personal lives. And so that is where we want to talk about next. But before we do that, we got to answer one more question. Do neural networks think like humans, right? These Gen AI systems and these AI systems, which are based on these very sophisticated neural networks, and neural networks are modeled on how the brain works, right? With the little neurons talking to each other. So the question is, do neural networks think like humans? And I've given you a couple of options here. Again, anonymous. Yes, no. What do you mean by think? For those of you who are maybe of a more academic bent. Or what do you mean by humans? Which is sort of its own interesting question. And then maybe my brain just hurts thinking about this. So again, totally anonymous. Go ahead and just tell us what you think the best answer is here. We'll share that back with you, and then we'll dive into a couple of use cases, some of which will probably be familiar, maybe a couple of which are less familiar, and maybe give you some thoughts about things that you might be able to use Gen AI or AI for going forward. Awesome. So I can see some responses coming in, and we'll give it just another moment here to give people an opportunity to participate. And then I know Maddie will share those results out so you can see what people said. Okay, so here we go. Here's what you said. Just over a third of you said, yeah, they kind of do think like humans, and then a little less than half of you are like, nope, they don't think like humans. Some of you really do want to argue about this question of what thinking means, which I'm always interested in talking about as well. I left that fourth one, and what do you mean by humans? Wondering if we had any actual AIs on the call, because presumably that would be the question that they would want answered, but apparently there's no AIs on the particular call. And then a few of you are willing to be honest about the fact that this makes your brain hurt, which is totally fine. So here's maybe something to ponder associated with this. A neural network, especially if it's big enough, is a black box. And in fact, we don't fully understand how these neural networks work. So one of the big AI companies is called Anthropic. They make a Gen AI engine called Claude. Maybe some of you have used it. And last fall, they announced that they were starting a project to try to figure out how Claude worked, which seems kind of funny. Like, we launched this thing and a year later, we're going to try to figure out how it works. And they studied it for like 4 or 5 months and they walked away saying, okay, we still don't know how it works, right? It still does things that we didn't anticipate. So in some ways, they're like people because they do things that are unexpected. But part of the problem is we still don't really understand how people think either. My own opinion is that these things are not conscious, right? And I'm happy at the end of this to chat about my own opinions about whether we're going to see generalized AI that actually thinks. But to the best of our knowledge, at the moment, none of these technologies have consciousness. They don't actually think like people. And there's a lot of reasons for that, including the fact that they didn't grow up, they don't have bodies, and so on and so forth. So it's an interesting question. It's worth keeping in mind and pondering, but I don't think you have to like blow up about it in order to think about how to use this technology going forward. Okay, so here's the real question that some of you are here to ask, which is, Adam, AI is coming for my job, right? Um, and the reality is AI and Gen AI are going to change how work is done. And we are already seeing that across almost every industry, every sector, every geography, every market. But rather than saying that AI is coming for your job, a much more likely scenario is that AI is coming to change the way you do your job or to change the kinds of value that is created in your job. Okay. So this was this very nice McKinsey report, which said, yeah, a certain amount of stuff is going to be automated. They did note that there are going to be certain jobs that are not, especially in the STEM spaces and business professionals. But it's really important to understand that even today, there's generally speaking no way for an AI to do your job. And there was this fantastic article in Wired literally 3 days ago, 4 days ago, basically saying AI agents are terrible freelance workers, right? So they did this analysis checking the ability of these frontier AI models to automate valuable work, and they gave them a range of simulated work activities, and they found that even the best ones could only do about 3% of the work. So in other words, for $144,000 worth of work to do, they earned $1,800, okay? So yes, you need to be aware of the changes that are in process and the changes that are coming, but you don't need to blow up right now and say, wow, this AI is going to do my job, because at the moment, that just flat out doesn't really exist. Okay, so here's a better question, right? If AI and Gen AI are going to be adopted on a wide scale basis, what's my best strategy? And I think you're better off knowing how to use AI and Gen AI and then making some informed decisions about it than simply not knowing. So I appreciate that some of us have very principled objections to AI and Gen AI, and that can be based on climate change concerns and energy utilization and exploitation of intellectual property. And I hear you. And my own son refuses to use AI because he's very concerned about the applications in creative spaces and the impact on creative artists. And I'm fine if that's the decision you choose to make. But if you choose to make that decision, you do need to be at least aware of what the implications are going to be downstream, right? I don't know where regulation is going to go. I don't know how all this is going to play out. What I'm here to do today is to say, look, we can recognize some of the problems with AI and Gen AI and still think a little bit about how we can begin to utilize some of its capabilities towards at least some of our own benefit and maybe benefit on a larger good as well. So let's talk a little bit about that. I'm going to walk you through a couple of use cases. I'm sure some of them are familiar to some or many of you. Awesome. If you're already doing this kind of stuff, that's fantastic. If you haven't seen this before, great. It's something new, but hopefully I'll prompt some thinking about things that you could do going forward. And of course, given my age, when I think about the future, I'm always reminded of Tron, one of the great movies of all time, sometimes underappreciated, that was talking about like sort of the future of things like AI. It didn't turn out that way, obviously, but always worth noting. Okay, so let's start with something that actually is probably relevant to DreamBank. Here is an insurance policy. This is a 20-page document filled with legal language, quite frankly, challenging to read. This is my personal insurance, my home insurance policy, by the way. So I took the whole thing and I cut and pasted it into Gemini. And I use Gemini just because I'm already in the Google ecosystem. It's not necessarily because Gemini is better. And I said, what does this policy say? Please summarize it. And in 5 seconds, Gemini said, oh, okay, this is an insurance policy and it covers dwelling. Here are all of the things that are covered. And you'll notice it walks through them bullet by bullet, including the numbers it's pulled out for how much things are covered for. And it also said, by the way, these are things that are not covered. And that provides this whole basis for thinking about what's in an insurance policy. And at the end, even though I didn't ask for this, Gemini said, by the way, you need to be aware of these important notes. Now, why might we do something like this? Well, the reality is all of us on a regular basis are hit with large, complex documents that are frankly too long to read or hard to understand. This is something that Gen AI is really, really good at, taking large amounts of text and summarizing it to find the things that are likely to be important. Um, Whether you chose to do this with an insurance policy or a legal contract or a terms and conditions for a website that maybe you've decided to, or an account that you've decided to sign up for, this may be a really helpful way to do something that maybe you would have skipped otherwise, right? And it can be very fast and very, very efficient. Okay, here's another idea. And this is more related to the kinds of things that I do as an entrepreneur, but I kept it in the insurance space just because of the context here. How I asked Gemini, how large is the market for cyber insurance, cybersecurity insurance in the United States? Consider some online, please suggest some online sites for follow-up. What factors should maybe a regular company think about if it wants to start offering this? So if we're an entrepreneur, we're thinking about starting a business, we can go to one of these engines and we can say, help me think about how big this is. Is this interesting? Is this going to be a profitable place to be? What kinds of things and challenges am I likely to face if I wanted to start a business in this space? And sure enough, Gemini came back with some information that it theoretically had cited, talking about how large the market might be and how big the opportunity is. And this can be a really, really good way to jumpstart a process that would otherwise be very time consuming, maybe involve an enormous amount of like online searching or a trip to the library. May not be good to replace all of that. You may want to still do your own research. And from my perspective, if you're starting a business, you should always talk to potential customers. But this can be a really, really fast way to take a look at something very, very quickly. And so, for example, Gemini said, look, if you're a normal insurance company and you want to get into cybersecurity insurance, here are some things you're probably going to have to think about. So if I'm working for an insurance company, this might be a starting point. I would definitely not hand this to my manager and claim it was mine. That's a very tricky thing to do. You got to watch out for that sort of thing. And I'm going to show you why in just a moment. But this might be a good way of making sure you didn't miss anything really, really important. Why do you have to be careful about this stuff? Well, in this particular scenario, I asked Gemini to include 3 sources for follow-up, and these were the 3 it gave me, and I could not find 2 of them. um, and this is one of the problems with Gen AI, which is sometimes it kind of either makes things up or it takes information it finds and then it reports it in a slightly different way. But I could not track down 2 of these sources. One of them I found, the first one, but the second and the third one, it was like Gemini had just kind of taken something it saw online, mixed it up with something it thought would be helpful, and then presented it to me as an outcome. I went back and I challenged it to give me other sources, and it got better at it over time. And this was a number of months ago, and Gemini and many of the other engines, especially Perplexity, are really good at giving you the actual sources. And I strongly encourage that if you're going to use Gen AI like this, you do want to double check some of the sources because Gen AI is still prone to sort of making stuff up. All right, maybe let's try something very, very different. So here's a situation where we have this budget account from a company. This is from a specific department in the organization. And at many organizations or at a small business, people are expected to look at budget data and then write a report about it, right? And so I took this data, which actually came from one of my other clients. I anonymized it, and then I dumped it into Gemini and said, please draft a 1-page report summarizing the following information, identify some things to address, as well as things that maybe the manager should be keeping in mind when thinking about next year's budget. And for those of us who don't have quantitative or financial backgrounds, this can be a really interesting and helpful approach towards avoiding spending hours and hours pouring through financial data. And sure enough, Gemini came back and said, hey, here are some things that I found. These are a little below budget. This one seems to be underspent. There's some variances in these areas. Looks like there was a one-time software purchase, which is throwing all the numbers off. And it also came back and said, hey, here are some actions that maybe you should consider taking. Why were some of these higher than expected? Why are these lower than expected? And for next year, maybe we should do a couple of things in order to try to ensure that the budget is better developed than it was and more accurate than it was in this particular situation. Now, It's very important to remember you're going to need to double check some of this information. I actually had an experience literally last week where I was handed some accounting data and I couldn't generate the report that I wanted with the accounting software that was available. And so I took the data and I dropped it into one of the Gen AI engines and I asked the Gen AI engine to generate the accounting report for me, and it did it totally wrong. Totally and utterly wrong. Even when I gave it additional guidance, only use this column, only use the data from 2023, it could not do it properly. So you do have to watch out. You can, depending on the level of complexity and whether you're using a general engine like GPT or whether you're using a highly specialized engine that maybe is supposed to be familiar with accounting data, especially when you're mixing text and content and numbers. The Gen AI engines don't have brains. They don't have common sense. They don't check things. And so you do have to watch out and make sure that you are checking to make sure that the numbers are being used correctly. So there's a lot that can be accomplished here, but at least for now, some of these systems, if not most of these systems, still do make mistakes like that. And so if you are going to do these kinds of reports, whether for a company you work for or on your own, you are going to want to double check information before you pass it off to someone and say this is the right answer. Gen AI is your co-pilot, and I'm sorry to use the Microsoft thing. I'm actually not a Microsoft fan, but I just love Airplane because, of course, it's a Wisconsin movie. Gen AI is not an autopilot. You can't at the moment just hand over total responsibilities to Gen AI and just let it run with them because you're not guaranteed that you're going to get all of the right results out. Here's another interesting one. This will be the last one I show you, and then we're going to wrap things up because we'll have a few minutes for Q&A and discussion. Here's a scenario. I'm a claims manager at an insurance company. I have to call a customer to explain that we're not going to pay their claim. We are going to pay their claim, but just not give them as much as we thought as they were hoping for. And I know this customer is already frustrated with this process. Can you provide me with a step-by-step outline for the conversation, suggestions how to keep my cool, how to try to help keep the customer cool? This is the sort of higher level thinking that we might wonder, oh my gosh, how can a Gen AI engine do that sort of thing? But in fact, Gen AI engines are really good at this kind of stuff. And here is what Gemini generated for me. Literally a step by, and I'm only showing you a couple steps here, but it was a step-by-step outline, including suggested statements to make, including not just the statement, but an explanation of what you're doing during the statement. I know you're frustrated, explaining the decision and giving you some thoughts on how to approach that. Here's why I'm calling you, explaining the reasons, and so on and so forth. It provided at the end of the response some suggestions. Let them vent without interruption. Be transparent. If you can offer them options, try to do so. And then, because of course you work for a company, we're trying to help them not, leave and go get their insurance somewhere else. Remind them of some of the benefits that they're getting. These are kind of some of the things that can be surprisingly powerfully done with Gen AI. You may have never tried something like that before. I have other examples of trying to mediate between employees who are getting on each other's nerves or who are angry at each other. It is kind of amazing some of the things that Gen AI can help you do. Again, use common sense, read the whole thing before you actually implement it, but it can be a really compelling guide, and it only takes about 5 seconds for the engine to generate it, which is probably a lot faster than it would have taken you to walk through all the steps of what you were going to try to do in this situation. So what's next? Where is Gen AI and AI going? I don't know, right? That's the problem. It is impossible to predict all the use cases in advance, but there are some things to consider. Anything where we are looking for predictable outcomes based on a large data set is going to be a likely target, right? So for example, all of us get spam email and probably 99.999% of it is now AI generated. Why? Because it doesn't matter if most of it doesn't work. Quality is not an issue. It's all about volume, right? Here's the thing that I think is going to be more interesting is that the visibility of a lot of AI and Gen AI is going to decrease. Right now, we work directly with GPT or Gemini, but you've probably already seen if you do a Google search, you get that summary right at the top. You're probably seeing that in other applications as well. The use is going to become seamlessly integrated into our other activities, right? My personal favorite example of that is that if I ask my students if they're using Gen AI, they will say no. But if I ask them if they're using Grammarly, they will say yes. Well, Grammarly is an AI tool, right? And so they don't even realize that it's happening in the background. The speed of tool development and new applications is going to grow because what's happening now is people are using AI to generate ideas for new applications and even to code the applications, or at least the first version of the applications. So the speed of this development is going to increase in the near term. And we will see use cases that start with low error cost, but they'll evolve towards higher error cost. Things that are more difficult or more challenging will become AI driven over time. And this is why I think that even if you have some principled concerns about AI and Gen AI, as much as I know it's probably going to be hard to do, it's probably worth it for you to do a little bit of experimentation with it just so that you see where this is going. I literally am fine if you say, I just can't do it. I'm against it. And I'm going to change my life in order to operate without dealing with it. But it is going to be out there, right? It is going to be out there. And you should be aware of how it works and what it's capable of and what it's not capable of. So, what's your best play? My friends, keep in mind that there have been all sorts of other technologies that changed everything: the telegraph, the telephone, the automobile. Think about how America is different because of the automobile. Think about the network of roads, all the infrastructure, the lights, the gas stations, all that kind of stuff, right? Think about how television changed our lives, then the personal computer, the internet, obviously, and smartphones, right? Some of you are probably watching this webinar on your smartphone right now. Yes, AI is going to change the world. And yes, there are going to be big impacts on job and work, and that's going to happen across the board, right? Yes, you can also choose to harness what AI can do. And my feeling is the time to start is probably now. Even if you just dip your toe in a little bit at the shallow end to kind of get a feel for it, I get it. None of us like giving away our personal data. We're worried about the big companies, and you do have to be aware of privacy concerns. If you're using one of the public engines, it means that everything you're entering into it is available to that engine for its own training purposes. Be aware of what the privacy requirements are for these things. Don't put company data into one of these public engines unless you have permission to do so, because they own that once it's been entered in. So you do need to be aware of those kinds of things. But the bottom line is that this is coming. The time to start is probably now because it's going to accelerate over time. There's always the option to perhaps use an off ramp if you feel like you just can't deal with it anymore. So, my friends, thank you for listening to me chat for half an hour. Good luck on your Gen AI journey. If you want a little joke out of this, I wanted a little image of a robot and a human holding hands. And I told Gemini to create one, and they were horrible. They were horrible images. And so eventually I had to go online and just track something down. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Maddie. I'm going to stop my share. We do have a little bit of time. If people would like to hang out for a few moments, I haven't been watching the chat box, but if there are questions, I'd be happy to at least try to address some of them. Otherwise, if you're good to go, thank you so much for being here. And Maddie, I turn it over to you.
Hello. Yeah, that was wonderful. I definitely took some notes and a new perspective was given. No questions have come in through the chat, just kind of a little quiet, which is totally fine. I know I didn't have any questions pop up. And so I'll give one more minute if any do pop up, but I thank everyone for participating in the polls. And I definitely love learning alongside of you all. And then,
So I see a question came up about recommended
yes.
training sources. Aside from just the first thing to do if you're interested is just go and open up one of the engines, GPT, Gemini, Claude. They're all technically free to use in one way, shape, or form, and just start playing with them. Um, if you want to learn more about AI as a whole, Google has free courses online about AI and Gen AI, not to code, but just to learn more about them. And so if you just go to Google and you type in Google free course AI Gen AI, it will begin offering you suggestions. And Google has an enormous library of free classes that you do at your own pace about things like Gen AI and other things like that.
One just popped in, just to clarify, anything that is out in for review becomes public.
So the issue here is that if you use one of the general engines like GPT or Gemini, and you just type in a question and it generates a response, they're using those prompt and responses for training their own model in the background. And there have been some demonstrations that extremely sophisticated engineered prompts can pull that data back out again. Now, if you saw what those prompts looked like, you would be like, nobody comes up with these things. They're like hundreds of characters long. They make no sense. They're sort of tricking the engine into revealing prior information. And in theory, you'd need to know what some of that prior information was. But the bottom line is that all of that data is sitting on those companies' servers, right? And that means that they're only as well protected as that company is protecting that data, right? Do Google and OpenAI have good protection systems? Oh, yeah. I mean, Google is about as good as it gets, but it doesn't belong to you anymore in those situations. Now, you can pay to have your own account. And in those situations, in most cases, you are now entitled to more privacy. Your prompts and responses may not be used for training. They are protected in a different way. For example, the University of Minnesota that I will do some work with as well, they have a unique account with Google where all of the prompt and responses that the students enter stay on the Minnesota network. So it's processed by Google, but the data stays at Minnesota. But not all of us can afford like a university, like a tier one university, to have that kind of relationship with Google. So you need to be careful about this, right? Because if you work for a company and they give you some financial reports and you drop them into your personal GPT account or your Gemini prompt and response, technically that's now owned by GPT or Google, and that you're not supposed to do. So please, please, please be very, very careful about entering in data about those kinds of things.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for answering all of our questions. And this was really insightful. Until next time, friends.
Awesome. Thanks, Maddie.
Bye.